Hello viewer. Alas, it is time for me to tell the final part of this grand tale. The story of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics is almost over, as the Union enters the modern era, leaving behind the bloodshed of the 20th century. Okay, I'm kind of lying. The journey here was not in any way smooth. A lot has happened, as per the usual in the mega campaign. I'm gonna first recap the first 3 parts, then go over what happened between the last video and today's video. In 1910, Russia was still ruled by the House of Romanov. Tsar Nicholas II ruled as an autocrat, and Russia was still stuck in the past and barely industrialized. The Great War, however, was what gave the working class of Russia the chance it needed to overthrow the capitalist empire. After years of civil war, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was established. By 1936, though, the Union was about to endure its greatest test. The Germans were out for revenge for their defeat in the Great War. They conquered half of Europe and occupied our western territories. However, the strength of the Soviet Union eventually overcame the Axis forces, and the Union defeated the Axis powers, alongside becoming the first nuclear power. That wasn't the end of conflict, though. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics then found itself in a Cold War against the United States of America. The United States sought to destroy communism around the world, so we had to support communist movements everywhere they popped up. During this time, our great leader Joseph Stalin passed away. After a power struggle, the head of the NKVD, Lavrentiy Beria, would assume control as the new General Secretary of the Soviet Union. He turned the Union into an order state, practically ruled by the newly formed KGB. He continued Stalin's policy of countering the West everywhere the Union could, but by the mid-60s, Beria had become paranoid. He declared that the West would one day just invade the common form, and the only way to put America in its place was to humiliate it with military force. The Third World War only lasted for 1.5 years, but it destroyed America's influence in Europe. NATO in mainland Europe was rapidly overrun, and all of America's attempts to open new fronts were crushed by the collective might of the common form. The West was completely humiliated, and the remaining NATO members requested peace. We thought we'd have to crush America ourselves, but the KGB claimed the US would collapse on its own from political issues. So America had been completely curb-stomped, and the USSR had become the only superpower. Beria was certain that the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics would be the global hegemon forevermore, but he couldn't have seen the massive changes that would follow. In 1979, Lavrentiy Beria passed away due to unknown circumstances. Regardless, his chosen successor, Yuri Andropov, was swiftly declared the new General Secretary. Being appointed head of the KGB after Beria became the General Secretary, he was the obvious option for Beria's replacement. He was chosen directly by Beria as successor, and because of Beria's control over the Soviet government, Andropov assumed a position with little issue. The 1980s would be one of the most turbulent decades of the century, as both the Soviet Union and the United States faced the risk of collapse for various reasons. The Soviet Union under Andropov was mostly a continuation of Beria's policies. However, Andropov's death in 1984 would send the Politburo into chaos, as Andropov hadn't chosen a successor. To make matters worse, reformists like Mikhail Gorbachev and Boris Yeltsin were threatening to take over the Union, and take it in a direction that would cause the complete downfall of the Union. Furthermore, the neo-Beriaist policies were becoming a major source of civil unrest in the Soviet Union. It seemed like a new Russian civil war was inevitable. It was only when Stalinist General Dmitry Yazov stepped in that the Soviet Union's situation stabilized. Many of Beria's policies were undone, and KGB lost a lot of power. The KGB massively resented this, but there was little they could do to stop the highly popular commander. The Soviet Union under Yazov managed to stabilize, but Stalinist economic policies were way too conservative for the modern day, so the economy became stagnant. Still, Yazov's leadership managed to avert disaster. President Ronald Reagan of the United States, though, failed to stabilize the country. After the assassination of Gus Hall by a still unknown assailant, the USA was on the brink of a violent civil war. In the wake of America's mass civil unrest, President Ronald Reagan announced the full dissolution of the United States in 1987. Over a period of 3 years, the former 50 states would form new unions and engage in combat with each other over the former lands of the USA. By 2010, the situation had largely stabilized, but there are multiple governments claiming to be the United States, one of which we officially support. That brings us to 2010. Despite the turmoil of the 1980s, the common form has managed to survive. That being said, we were forced to call back a lot of the military to Moscow and demobilize them. Because of this, we had no choice but to let our former satellite states in Europe become independent allies of Moscow. It's worked out relatively okay for us. but we cannot give people the impression that we are weak. Anyway, now that you're caught up, we can proceed with the finale of this grand tale. It's been a long journey, and we're in the endgame now. Let's finish this.
Union has come in here to dwell.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Yazov is now 85 years old. He's a very old man, but he still wants global communism. This is a goal that became widespread in the Soviet Union after Beria popularized it in 1973. It's something that has become a core part of the CBSU. However, because of the economic stagnation and our military being way too expensive, we can't spread global communism just yet. Luckily, it looks like we have all the time in the world as Libya revolted against the United Arab Republic. It's a clear sign that politics in the world are bound to heat up once again. However, we can't take advantage of it as a KGB agent who secretly wanted Beria's policies to be restored would use his position as Yazov's guard to kill the general secretary. The assassin was promptly dealt with, but the Politburo now needed to select a new general secretary. If we go without a leader for too long, the Union as a whole is doomed. Although the Politburo didn't change when Andropov ascended to power, it was completely shifted when Yazov staged a coup. The current Politburo had 4 options to choose from: Gennady Zyuganov, Vladimir Putin, Alexander Rutskoy, and Mikhail Gorbachev. Rutskoy wasn't popular, so he wasn't chosen. Putin was rejected because the Politburo feared that putting him in power would facilitate a return to the USSR under Beria. Furthermore, Putin was suspected of being affiliated with the late Lev Gumilev, a Russian fascist who pioneered modern Eurasianism. That would destroy the revolution, so the Bureau decided that Putin was unworthy. It was now down to Gennady Zyuganov and Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev was known for his reformist ideas, putting forward plans to liberalize the Soviet Union while maintaining communism in some form, all while normalizing relations with the Democratic League to preserve world peace. He is somewhat popular, mainly among the youth. However, some people feared that his liberal reforms would cause the downfall of the Soviet Union as a whole. It was because of these fears that Gennady Zyuganov was chosen by the Politburo as the new General Secretary of the Soviet Union. He pushes for a continuation of Malenkov's policies, despite them not being in place for long because of Beria's ousting him from power sometime after. He is also somewhat like Joseph Stalin in that he wants more traditional Marxist-Leninism, but he is not as conservative as Yazov. He has plans to reform the economy to end stagnation, rebuild the army, and secure neo-Malenkovist policies. While Zyuganov was working on breaking up pro-independence groups in the Union, things are getting heated in America. In the American People's Commonwealth, a socialist warlord in the American Northeast, the Twin Towers were brought down after a terrorist attack by far-right forces. The implications are worrying. Regardless of if this was sponsored by the American Republic or if it was an internal plot within the Commonwealth, this signals the possible return of conflict in the Americas. For now, America is irrelevant to us. Back home, Zyuganov first strengthened the Politburo to ensure the safety of Marxist-Leninism. Zyuganov made sure to begin his economic recovery plan as quickly as he could, since the longer the stagnation went on, the bigger the chance the nation had of going down the path of the now dissolved United Arab Republic. Things were happening all at the same time. On one hand, we were increasing production quotas and reaching agreements with dissident workers, while over in America, the American Republic had elected the fascist David Duke into power, only for him to be ousted from power as the military seized control over the nation after it fell into chaos because of the Congress remaining Republican. Luckily, Zyuganov wouldn't have to worry about anything of the sort happening to him because his swift reforms managed to end the economic stagnation. Until now, the Common Forum has been mostly confined to Europe and some parts of Asia, like the Middle East and also Japan after it unified under the communist regime. However, after the ruling party of Ethiopia secured the continued mandate, the communist regime requested to join the Common Forum. We happily let them in, meaning the Common Forum now expands its grasp outside of Eurasia. We do intend on establishing global communism, we just haven't had the time due to much more pressing issues. The big thing holding us back from global communism is our army. Before his passing, Beria had ordered the army to be fully turned into armored forces. However, this was super expensive. Armor is still the best division you can get on a field, no doubt, but it is too expensive to be fielded en masse. We need to bring back standard ground infantry as the bulk of our army. We also need to revise our division templates, as they have become Poor sight. Zhuganov decided to take a page out of Stalin's book and initiate his own 5-year plan. They worked great for Stalin when he wanted to industrialize the Union, so Zhuganov believed a modern 5-year plan could get the Soviet economy back on its feet. His initial reforms had only ended to stagnation. He wanted more than just steady growth. If the Soviet economy could see a gigantic rise, it would be the proof he needed that the capitalist states were archaic and needed to go. The American People's Commonwealth continues to destabilize, as Noam Chomsky now has to handle a full revolt by the Central Committee, which believed Chomsky was leading the Commonwealth to its demise. The Central Committee had put its faith in communism, so we sent them one tank division as a peacekeeping force. We had reformed our template at this point, but our tanks are still Cold War era, so they aren't perfect just yet. See, the Kurds revolted against Turkey in 1985 when the Common Forum was at risk of falling apart, so we just kind of had to accept that the Kurds existed. However, our reformed military and the entire Common Forum are fully prepared to support each other in times of need, and the Kurds had just signed a death wish by attacking Iraq. Sadly, the rebels in the APC lost without our help. Speaking of America, the former USA is seeing more and more political chaos as Texas became a vassal of the American Republic at some point, and Canada had invaded Lincoln and Montana. Soon enough, we will undoubtedly see America's warlords directly engage each other to finally reunite America. While that was happening, Germany approached us with an offer. See, relations between us and China have been rocky, even despite the collapse of the USA. Germany has enjoyed good relations with us both, and they decided to take matters into their own hands to try get us and the Chinese to forgive and forget. Potentially having the Chinese back us up seemed like a great opportunity, so we agreed. After defeating Algeria and setting up a communist government, Zhuganov officially declared that the Soviet Union would be embracing conservative communism, and other forms of communism within the Union were not to be trusted. Although very authoritarian, this move does have some credit to it, as other forms of communism have had negative effects on the Union, mainly Beria's communism. By now, the military had gotten way stronger. I wanted the military to be bigger before I officially went on the move, but I could use this downtime to send peacekeeping forces around the world to help fellow communists in their fights. Obviously, we would support our allies in the Common Forum, but helping new communist governments find their footing is just as, if not more important. That's why we sent 2 tank divisions to assist the frontline states in their fight against apartheid South Africa. Namibia was trying to secure its independence, while Angola had directly joined to assist Namibia. Although our tank template was practically perfect now, we were still mainly using Cold War era tanks with poor breakthrough, which definitely showed when we used them on the battlefield. Still, I was confident we could beat South Africa. I thought the Common Forum would be at peace for a while, but for some reason, Germany declared war on Canada, starting World War IV. Now, I could join in and destroy the remnants of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but I knew for a fact I was not ready for a war like that. At least not yet. I wanted modern tanks before I directly expanded communism. Around the world, we were engaging in diplomacy with other nation states. We opened up new embassies to expand our grasp and send aid to the European Union. We actually left the European Union after Yazov ascended to power, but we would rejoin after Germany suggested we do. Germany at this point is the leader of the European Union more or less, so it's not surprising they made the suggestion. Back in America, the Union of American People's Republics launched an invasion of their neighbor, Utah. Obviously, this is a sign that a full war to reunite America is just around the corner, and we need to take full advantage of that. We sent some tanks over to help them out, even though they really won't need them until they directly engage the other major contenders. While we were doing that, we held a South American summit in Rio. The outcome of the conference would determine our preferred trade partner in the coming years. And for some reason I picked Brazil, even though it's a member of the Democratic League, whom I will be fighting soon enough. The West Coast Communists declared war on Canada's Idaho puppet for some reason. I don't know why, but it worked out as Canada quickly gave up on its puppets in the Pacific Northwest. Despite this being really strange, it works just fine for us. The UAPR can expand further east, thus giving the other powers the incentive to begin working on reunifying America. Back in Africa, I decided to withdraw from South Africa because my outdated Cold War tanks and the poor supply in the region were making any advances against a highly prepared South Africa impossible. Over in India, the Naxalite movement rose up against the Republic of India. The communists were previously in power in India, only to be banned after being suspected of being Chinese collaborators. I sent some tanks over to help India to help the communists to the best of my ability, but it would appear trains are not India's specialty because the supply lines were kind of dog shit. I can't lie, a lot of different stuff was happening at once. so stuff was getting chaotic. On one hand, we finally stopped using those archaic tanks, and now we're producing modern 2014 medium tanks. We also began working on getting a full paratrooper force deployed, since we want them to be the spiritual successor of our super successful Mountaineer divisions from the Cold War. On the other hand, we prepared a bit more for our intervention in the war against Canada by embargoing the nation. Politics in America were now completely on fire. The American Republic was at war with the Democratic League, the Federation of American Syndicates, and the Midwest. Not sure how that's gonna work out for them, but who am I to gatekeep? Back in India, things were painful. The Indian rebels didn't get the memo and didn't support my flanks, so my peacekeeping forces got surrounded, so I had to briefly recall the tanks from India. Then even more communist cells rose up behind the INC's front line. Gee, that would have been helpful when the INC still held all the good supply depots. The situation in America has escalated. It is now a free-for-all, as all remaining factions are now at war with each other. America is the last conflict I want to intervene in before I directly expand communism myself. This is because the KGB firmly believed that the UAPR would join the Common Forum if it reunited the United States. Having America in the Common Forum would mean the death of Canada. This is why supporting the UAPR was so important. I sent 11 tank divisions as a peacekeeping force, but really, I wanted to use them to reunite America under the Communist Party. The first opponent of the UAPR was the American Reclamation Authority, which controls the Midwest. Luckily, the Midwest was very underdeveloped before the USA collapsed, and the terrain is borderline impossible to defend, so the tanks had little trouble pushing through and forcing the ARA to surrender. We then moved our focus to the Great Lakes. While we were fighting in the Great Lakes, we got the news of the British invasion of Ireland. See, back in 2010, British democracy completely collapsed, and Queen Elizabeth II restored the full authority of the monarchy. Now, the British decided they were ready to restore the strength of the British Empire by firstly invading Ireland. Let it be known, I plan on atomizing London, but I gotta get some other stuff handled first. Anyway, locking in on America again, the Great Lakes Confederation was incredibly weak, so taking them out was a piece of cake. At this point, the syndicates had defeated the American Republic and set up new sponsored states in the South. However, puppets surrender if their overlord does, so I focused my tanks exclusively on the heart of the syndicates. We absolutely wiped the floor with them, it's not even funny. The tanks had little issue driving through the cities of the East Coast, and soon the syndicates had to throw in the towel. So, the Union of American People's Republics had emerged triumphant in the struggle to reunite America with our help. I wasn't actually sure if they would join the Common Forum though, since they do have the option to form their own faction. But either way, they'll be fighting Canada at some point, so I wasn't too concerned. Anyway, since America was now a fellow communist nation, and our new fighter planes were being mass-produced, which I've been doing this whole time by the way, I determined that the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was finally ready to get back on the move and spread communism with direct military force. Now that we have America on our side, there's nothing that can stop the Common Forum now, right? Zhuganov first decided to start small. Austria had been created as a neutral nation after the Great Patriotic War to appease the Western Allies. But the Western Allies were vanquished after the Third World War. There is no reason to let Austria stay as rump state anymore. It is time to bring them into the fold. While the Red Army marched into Austria, Zhuganov also ordered for our nuclear arsenal to be activated and put on standby. Obviously, we aren't going to use our nuclear weapons on Austria. However, some foes will undoubtedly face total atomic annihilation. We will get political blowback from this, seeing as nuclear weapons have not been used since 1946, when we nuked Hiroshima. But we do not care. We just do what is necessary. After establishing a new socialist Austria, we then prepared for 3 thermonuclear strikes on Britain. We've been at war with the British for a little while now due to their Middle Eastern interests, and we fully plan on occupying Britain ourselves. We just need to lighten their defenses first. We also prepared a ground invasion of Switzerland. Quote-unquote neutrality will not save them from their liberation. I focused on Britain since we were already at war. I hit London, Plymouth, and Birmingham with thermonuclear missiles. I swiftly followed this up with an airborne invasion of Britain around the port of Plymouth. We managed to secure the port, but the British defenders swiftly stopped us from pushing into the rest of England. I hit Britain with 3 more nukes while I tried to break through. It took so long that my justification for Switzerland finished while I was waiting. We destroyed them without a second thought. Even after I nuked Britain's troops on the Plymouth front, I eventually decided it would be more worthwhile to extract the paratroopers from Plymouth and bring them back to France so I could conduct another airborne invasion. We landed at the port of Dover and promptly flooded it with troops. From there, we easily overran the British forces with little issue. The British surrendered, and we divided Britain into 3 communist republics. We did more or less the same thing to the Kingdom of Italy. We hit them with 5 thermonuclear missiles, and due to the rocky terrain in the north, we opted to pair-drop on Rome. We split Italy into 2 and forced them to surrender. Italy was officially made communist. So everything's going great, right? A heaping majority of Europe is now under the common form. The Democratic League's field of manpower is a total joke in comparison to what the common form is packing. Well, it was, I should say. While we were invading Italy, the entire war of the Democratic League took a turn for the worse as a very strong country joined up with them. Can you guess who? I'll just cut to the chase. It was China. Communist China, despite not undergoing any democratic reforms, was admitted to the Democratic League, completely changing the war. China has a massive industrial and manpower base, which is why they have a massive army. Despite not being democratic, Canada probably let them in because it gave them a full front against us. Furthermore, a communist nation with a massive border with us joining the Democratic League was completely unexpected, which anyone with a brain would know. That's why our border with China was completely unguarded. The war had now gone in a completely different direction. The war with China is the biggest instance of leftist infighting in history, and has caused people to view the whole communist solidarity thing with skepticism. Regardless, whoever comes out on top will define the future of the working class forever. I moved both of my infantry armies to Siberia to halt the Chinese advance as fast as I could. Once my forces arrived, I immediately launched a counterattack to try pushing the Chinese back. I nearly got a decent pocket in Mongolia, but one key factor would cause us to lose the pocket: supply. Although we had halted the Democratic League's advances, they had managed to capture the most important piece of infrastructure near the border. The Trans-Siberian Railway had become useless as large portions of it had been occupied by China. Without supply, advancing against China is completely impossible. Normally, when you have bad supply in Hearts of Iron 4, you just capture more supply hubs. However, our big counteroffensive had failed and drained our division's organization, so advancing is completely impossible until we build new supply lines in Siberia. Despite the front in China becoming a sluggish attritional war, things were looking up. The Union of American People's Republics never forgot our help in the reunification of America, so they decided to return the favor by asking to join the Common Form, which we wholeheartedly agreed to. America joining the global revolution means Canada is done for. This means we don't need to get a landing in North America ourselves, and America can handle Canada in a matter of weeks without problem. Canada died soon after, leaving China and Brazil as the only majors of the Democratic League alive. Though Brazil was barely alive at this point, but China was still standing strong as we were still waiting for new supply hubs and railroads to be constructed. I realized at this point we wouldn't get any use of our tanks out here, so I decided to move my tanks and my paratroopers to Japan so I could try opening a new front. That would take some time, but I believed regaining supply on the main front might take too long. While I was waiting for supply to be reestablished in Siberia and for my tanks and paratroopers to arrive in Japan, I decided to try nuking Beijing. I first used a thermonuclear strike, but the damn missile failed to explode. I had to settle on a normal nuclear bomb. Embarrassing. Eventually, the supply in Siberia was mostly back, so we launched a new big offensive. The offensive actually saw us get good gains as we captured supply hubs from the Chinese, but this offensive wasn't what broke China's back. It was actually an offensive on a completely new front that would be responsible for the fall of China. Since Japan reunified under the communist government, it has become one of the most dedicated communist nations in the world. They have a damn good navy, and using that navy, they landed at the port of Ningbo. I originally had planned on paradropping on one of China's ports, but this was even better. I swiftly reinforced the Japanese landing with my tanks, fully intending on exploiting the Japanese landing. While we slowly pushed on the main front, we were making big plays on the Ningbo front as we managed to capture the strategic city of Shanghai. We were getting a lot of gains on the ground in the southern front, so we moved our 2nd Infantry Army to the south to support the tanks as they drove north to Beijing. We managed to capture Nanking with little issue, blasting through the city center. The southern front opening did more damage than we expected. The Chinese military was now actively collapsing. We gave our forces the order to push into China as best as they could, and instructed the tanks to drive to Beijing and spare 0 Chinese troops they encountered. This was even easier than we expected, as Japan pulled off another major seaborne invasion in the north, rapidly accelerating the Chinese collapse. Their military fell apart to the point where the northern front was fully back in our favor, and we attacked Beijing from both fronts. The city couldn't withstand the pressure, and the heart of Chinese communism was captured. The Chinese didn't survive for long after the fall of Beijing, and after we pushed into Manchuria some more, the People's Republic of China formally surrendered to our forces. After clearing out some Canadian forces in Xinjiang, China was fully brought under our authority. Now that China was down, the Democratic League's only major power left was Brazil, which was already barely standing. We believed one major offensive would be all we needed to destroy the Democratic League's last holdout once we secure a foothold. Once my paratroopers arrived in South America, I originally planned on using my paratroopers to do an airborne invasion of a Brazilian port. But we didn't have enough range because of South America's states being really strange. I had to use my paratroopers as marines to land on the port. This went well, and once our standard infantry arrived, Brazil stood no chance. Soon we arrived in Brazil's capital, and the Democratic League threw in the towel. The Treaty of Brasilia was pretty standard, for the most part. New communist governments were established in the former Democratic League lands. For China, though, we had something in mind for them that nobody expected. Everyone expected us to put in a Soviet-style communist government in place of the Maoist government. Some thought we would also split off places like Xinjiang and Tibet as punishment. We did something nobody expected. Zhuganov decided to completely annex China into the Soviet Union. See, he had a grand idea. If China and Russia could come together under one grand union, then the world would slowly join the fold as workers' solidarity saw new heights. Obviously, China couldn't be admitted as a single SSR due to population and industry, so China was admitted as 8 different SSRs. Unsurprisingly, there was a lot of resistance in China and a lot of criticism from the rest of the Commonform. We do not care, for they know they cannot stop us. The main source of Chinese anger was the creation of the Manchurian SSR, which they saw as an insult to the Chinese spirit because of its history with the old Japanese Empire. However, the way we partition China is the only way we can make the annexation work. Once the resistance dies out, China can be fully integrated into the Union, and maybe we'll even get a Chinese fella as a general secretary. The rest of the campaign was relatively uninteresting. I just invaded more countries, turning each one communist. The most interesting thing that happened was the nuclear holocaust I committed in Cuba. Any longtime viewer of the channel will know I hate world conquests because I think they're extremely boring. So after we occupied Pakistan, I decided to call it quits here. We all know what would have happened if I kept playing anyway. That marks the end of this story. The Soviet Union managed to fully secure its position in the world and become a permanent superpower after the annexation of China. Now, if this mega Soviet Union will survive, I'm not sure, because the annexation of China is an undertaking no nation has ever done before. But communism as an ideology was in the same position just 100 years ago. Nobody had tried it before us, but now it's the leading ideology. We will make sure this union survives, even if it has some pains. That, comrades, marks the end of this incredible tale. It was a fun one to make, even if it performed a bit poorly in comparison to my other videos. Still, I'm not sure if I'll do anything like this again, since, like I said, it didn't perform like I hoped it would. Anyway, you can expect a full compilation of the mega campaign on Wednesday. I'll be going back to normal-ish uploads now. Take care, comrades. Long live the world revolution.